Have you ever noticed that your mind becomes the loudest right when you need peace the most? You finally sit down to rest, take a breath, close your eyes, and suddenly your brain pulls out every mistake you've ever made. Every awkward moment, every worst-case scenario. It's like your mind waits for the quiet to ambush you. And here's the strange part. Why does your inner critic sound more like a bully than a guide? Why does it attack you right when you're trying to do better, grow, or simply relax? You're not alone. Right now, more Americans than ever are struggling with overthinking, anxiety, and that constant mental chatter that never seems to switch off. But long before mental health became a trend on TikTok, long before therapy became mainstream, Carl Jung already mapped out exactly why the mind turns against itself. Jung didn't see the inner critic as an enemy. He saw it as a fragment of you, a part that was exiled, misunderstood, and forced into a role it never wanted. A protector that learned the wrong methods, a scared inner guardian that only knows how to protect you through fear. And once you understand this, everything about your anxiety begins to make sense. In this video, you're going to discover why your inner critic exists through Jung's lens, why overthinking is not a flaw, but a sign of unresolved inner conflict, the hidden shadow inside you that amplifies anxiety, how to calm your inner critic using Jung's practical techniques, and how to finally feel safe inside your own mind. So let's begin with something Jung understood better than anyone else. The inner critic isn't born, it's created. What if the harshest voice in your life was never truly yours? It feels internal, it feels personal, it feels like you. But Jung believed that the inner critic is not born inside you, it's planted. In childhood, you don't have the ability to question the world. You absorb it. Every comment feels like truth. Every tone of voice feels like law. Every sigh of disappointment feels like danger. Jung said the inner critic begins as an external authority. Parents, teachers, religion, older siblings, coaches, early failures. All the people who shaped your sense of safety. And as a child, safety is everything. So when someone says, try harder, don't mess this up, be good, you don't hear guidance. You hear, this is what I must become to survive. Children don't reject these messages. They internalize them. What begins as their voice becomes your voice because the psyche doesn't understand nuance yet. It only understands if I follow this voice, I'm safe. If I don't, I might lose love. This is where Jung introduced the idea of the internalized superego, a psychic structure built from the expectations of others. A structure that believes it's protecting you through control, perfectionism, and fear. Think about how this shows up in adulthood. A kid who heard, try harder, becomes an adult who can't rest without guilt. A kid who heard, don't mess this up, becomes an adult who fears mistakes more than missed opportunities. A kid who grew up with, why can't you be more like Cork, becomes an adult who compares themselves to everyone, even strangers on the internet. And because these voices are so old, older than your conscious memory, they feel like identity. That's the biggest mistake most people make. Believing the critic is the real you. Letting it make decisions. Letting it define worth. Letting it narrate your entire life. But here's the truth. Jung wanted people to understand. Your inner critic is not your identity. It's a borrowed voice, a loop of old instructions meant for a version of you that no longer exists. And once you see that, you don't have to obey it anymore. You can meet it with curiosity instead of fear. You can question it instead of collapsing beneath it. You can finally ask, whose voice am I really hearing right now? Because if the critic isn't truly you, then who is speaking underneath all that noise? That's where the real transformation begins. What if your overthinking is actually a survival algorithm? Not a flaw, not a weakness, not a sign that you're too sensitive or too emotional, but a system, ancient, intelligent, and deeply misunderstood, designed to keep you alive. Jung believed that anxiety and overthinking arise when the conscious mind feels unsafe, and when safety disappears, the psyche does the only thing it knows how to do. It prepares for danger. Overthinking isn't your mind torturing you. It's your mind rehearsing danger to avoid future pain. A built-in primitive radar scanning the environment, the same way early humans scanned for predators. But here's where it gets interesting. The threats have changed. The wiring hasn't. Past threat? Will something kill me? Modern threat? Will someone judge me? Once upon a time, the fear was wolves in the dark. Now it's emails, breakups, job interviews, unread texts, and the quiet fear that you're not enough. That's why modern overthinking feels so irrational, yet so overwhelming. Your nervous system reacts to embarrassment the same way your ancestors reacted to blood and danger. And think about how this shows up in everyday American life. You reread a text message 5 times before sending it. You replay an awkward conversation from 3 years ago like it's breaking news. You catastrophize a job interview as if one wrong sentence will destroy your entire future. You scroll social media not for entertainment, but to check if you're still socially accepted. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a nervous system trying to predict pain before it arrives. And here's the Jungian insight most people never hear. Overthinking isn't too much thinking. It's a disconnect. A split between the ego, your conscious self, and the unconscious, your deeper wisdom. When these two separate, anxiety rushes in to fill the silence, and noise becomes the substitute for intuition. But the biggest mistake people make is trying to think their way out of overthinking. You can't use logic to fix a threat your body believes is emotional. It's like trying to stop a smoke alarm by screaming at it. Because overthinking is not actually the problem. It's the symptom. The real issue is the absence of inner safety. And that brings us to the next deeper question. The one Jung spent his entire life trying to answer. If your overthinking is a protective response, then what part of you actually feels unsafe? Jung had a name for it. And once you see it, everything about your anxiety will start to make sense. Anxiety skyrockets the moment you hide from the version of you that needs love the most. Not the polished version. Not the high-functioning version. Not the one who has everything under control, but the raw, messy, afraid, emotional self you learn to bury. This is what Jung called the shadow, the qualities you suppress to be accepted, the parts of you that feel too much, not enough, or unacceptable. And here's the twist most people never realize. Your inner critic attacks you because your shadow scares it. Overthinking isn't random, it's strategic. It's your psyche's way of protecting you from revealing the traits you've learned to hide. Think about the patterns. The perfectionist isn't chasing excellence. They're hiding a deep fear of inadequacy. The overthinker isn't searching for clarity. They're hiding the fear of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. The people pleaser isn't naturally selfless. They're hiding anger they're terrified to express, anger that was never allowed to exist. These patterns aren't personality traits, they're survival strategies. And Jung noticed something powerful. The inner critic becomes the most aggressive when the shadow becomes the largest. The more of yourself you exile, silence, or deny, the harder the critic has to work to keep the mask intact. That's why overthinking feels exhausting. It's not the thinking that drains you. It's the constant effort of hiding from yourself. Yet most people make the same mistake over and over. They mistake their shadow for weakness. They avoid discomfort. They try to fix themselves instead of understanding themselves. But Jung never saw the shadow as something bad. He saw it as the birthplace of power, the reservoir of intuition, creativity, strength, and authenticity. Your anxiety isn't rising because you're broken. It's rising because your shadow is knocking on the door, asking to be acknowledged. And your critic is screaming, "Don't open it." Here's the truth most people never hear. Your critic is loud because your shadow is unheard. Not because you're damaged, but because a part of you is desperate for acceptance. So the question becomes, how do you calm the critic without silencing yourself? How do you create safety without building another mask? To answer that, we need to go deeper into Jung's practical methods, the tools he believed could transform the inner critic from a bully into a guide. And that journey begins now. You can't silence the inner critic by fighting it, but you can disarm it. That's the part most people get wrong. They try to overpower the critic with positive thinking, motivational quotes, or affirmations pasted on a bathroom mirror. But Jung understood something far more profound. What you resist persists. And the inner critic is no exception. Instead of defeating the critic, Jung suggested relating to it, not as an enemy, but as a frightened part of the psyche that learned the wrong job. Here are 4 Jungian tools that transform the critic from a bully into something closer to a guide. 1. The chair dialogue. Give the critic a body. Sit 2 chairs across from each other. One is you. The other is your critic. It sounds strange, but it works because the psyche thinks in symbols. When you sit in the critic's chair and let its voice speak, ask, "What are you trying to protect me from?" When did you first learn to speak this way? Almost always, the critic reveals fear, not cruelty. Fear of being embarrassed, fear of being abandoned, fear of repeating an old wound. Once fear is named, it loses its authority. 2. Name the critic, the manager, the teacher, the analyst. When you name the critic, you create psychological distance. This is cognitive diffusion, a method backed by modern science but rooted in Jung's idea of personification. You stop saying, "I am not good enough," and instead say, "The manager thinks I need to be perfect to stay safe." Subtle shift, huge difference. It turns an identity into a character. 3. Shadow journaling. Let the hidden speak. Write down, "The part of myself I'm afraid to show is, what would happen if I accepted this part?" This isn't regular journaling, it's shadow dialogue. You allow the exiled part of you, the one the critic is terrified of, to speak honestly. When the shadow is acknowledged, the critic no longer has to guard the door. 4. Somatic grounding. Calm the body, quiet the mind. Overthinking happens in the mind. Anxiety happens in the body. If you calm only one, the other keeps screaming. Breathing practices, slow exhalations, cold exposure, grounding your feet on the floor, these interrupt the nervous system's threat response. And when the body feels safe, the critic loses its megaphone. The mistake most people make: trying to out-positivity the critic, telling themselves, "Just stop overthinking. Just be confident. Just ignore it." That's not healing, that's denial. The critic quiets down when it feels heard, not defeated. It softens when you speak to it, not when you silence it. It transforms when you treat it like a scared child, not a monster. But there's still one final layer, the deepest layer of all. Because the critic isn't the root of the problem, it's the messenger. To truly heal, you must meet the part of you it's been trying to protect. The critic is loudest when the inner child feels alone. Not when you're weak, not when you're failing, but when a younger part of you, the emotional you, the vulnerable you, feels unprotected. Jung believed that true healing happens when your adult self finally becomes the parent you needed but didn't have. Not because your parents were bad people, but because every child grows up with moments where emotional safety was missing. And here's the deepest truth. Your anxiety isn't the problem. Your lack of inner protection is. When there's no inner parent, the critic steps in. It becomes hypervigilant, controlling, harsh. It tries to keep you safe the only way it knows, through fear. But the moment you become your own source of safety, the critic can finally relax. Imagine a scared child crying in a corner. Now imagine an adult towering over them, shouting, "Stop crying. Calm down. What's wrong with you?" That's what you do to yourself every time you say, "Stop overthinking." You're being dramatic. Just get it together. This is why your anxiety spikes, because your inner child doesn't need discipline. It needs presence. Now imagine a different moment. You kneel down beside that same child. Your voice softens. You say, "You're safe. I'm here. You're allowed to make mistakes. You don't have to impress anyone for me to stay." Can you feel how different that is? Your nervous system feels it. Your shadow feels it. Your critic feels it. Because overthinking melts when safety increases. Anxiety decreases when inner belonging increases. The mind quiets when the heart is no longer alone. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Not eliminating your flaws, but integrating your abandoned parts. Not overcoming your inner critic, but outgrowing it. Because once the inner child feels protected, the critic no longer has to scream. You don't silence the critic, you replace the conditions that forced it to exist. You become the inner parent, the anchor, the ground, the voice of calm. And suddenly the noise inside you turns into something gentler, something wiser, something human. And that brings us to the final truth Jung tried to teach, the truth that ties this entire journey together. So here we are, at the end of this journey inward, a journey not to silence your mind, but to understand it in a way you never have before. Because the truth is this: your inner critic was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to protect the child you used to be, the scared version of you, the unheard version, the version that didn't know how to ask for safety, so it learned to anticipate danger instead. And the moment you stop fighting that voice, the moment you turn toward it instead of away, is the moment it stops fighting you. The world becomes less threatening. Your choices become less fear-driven. Your anxiety becomes less of an enemy and more of a compass. Jung believed the psyche never works against us. It only becomes louder when we refuse to listen. So let me leave you with a question, one that only you can answer. What if the goal isn't to silence the mind, but to understand what it's been trying to say for years? Maybe your overthinking isn't a malfunction. Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's the oldest part of you asking not for perfection, but for presence. And now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what does your inner critic sound like, and what do you think it's trying to protect? Your answer might help someone else recognize their own voice. And if you want more Jungian insights, more depth, more psychological clarity, subscribe. Here, we explore the soul beneath the symptoms, the stories beneath the anxiety, and the human being beneath the noise. Thank you for watching. Take care of your inner child. The rest will follow.